We said last night that the evidence leaves us with one of the following two options. If the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. What are our two options? We said number one, either no one created something out of nothing, which is the atheistic view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theistic view. Now, my question last night was this: which view is more reasonable? That no one created something out of nothing, or that someone created something out of nothing? It's got to be someone, right? And last night we said you can ask who made the someone, but that's certainly more reasonable than no one. No one created something out of nothing, please. Nothing comes from nothing. Nothing ever could, right? Okay, even Julie Andrews knew that. Didn't she sing that in some sort of Sound of Music movie or something? Nothing comes from nothing. So the much more reasonable conclusion is that someone created something out of nothing. And we dealt with the who made God question last night, so I won't go into that. No one made God. We know that. He's the uncaused first cause. And then we asked, if you want to ask a good question of an atheist, ask, if there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing at all? If there is no God, why does anything exist? If the atheist says, well, the universe has always existed, therefore it doesn't need a cause, you would say what? Search! And add Kalam, cosmological argument. Second law, universe expanding, radiation afterglow, great galaxy seeds, Einstein. And then the Kalam cosmological argument confirms that. So the evidence points to the fact that space, matter, and time had a beginning. If that's the case, the cause must be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. All right? Now, that's what we did last night, and we ended on this slide. We said, how do atheists respond to this evidence? So now we're going to pick up from where we left off last night. Okay? You guys ready to go? Because you're going to say, well, Frank, that just seems so rational here. If your evidence is good, it makes sense that in the beginning there must have been a beginner. But how do atheists respond to this? How many people have seen this book, The Grand Design by Stephen Hawking? Okay, a few of us have. This book came out about 6 months or so ago, and this book got a lot of press because Stephen Hawking is a very well-respected physicist who has been around a long time, and Hawking is kind of a medical miracle. I don't know if you know much about Hawking, but about 40 or so years ago, he was diagnosed with what is called Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, and Lou Gehrig's disease normally will kill you in a year or two. Well, here's Hawking, 40 years later, still alive. So he's sort of a medical miracle, brilliant man, and he wrote this book called The Grand Design with another author. Let's take a look at what he says in this book, because it got a lot of attention, and he is a leading atheist, all right? First of all, Hawking agrees that the universe had a beginning, and he cites much of the surge evidence we've already been through. He agrees with what we've been through so far. Secondly, he agrees that our universe appears to be highly fine-tuned for life. And we're going to talk more about the fine-tuning here in a few minutes. I mentioned a little bit of it when we talked about the G in surge, the great galaxy seeds. But Hawking's already agreeing with that. Now let's go into the book. And by the way, last night we had a question from a young lady in the back. She was holding her little baby, you remember, on this book. So let's go through this book in a little bit more detail. Here are some philosophical problems with the book. Here's what Hawking says. And before I put that up here, let me point this. One thing I like about Hawking is that he tells you exactly where he's coming from. He does not beat around the bush. He just says it in plain English. Here's what he says on page 34. This book is rooted in the concept of scientific determinism, which implies that there are no miracles or exceptions to the laws of nature. Now, what is scientific determinism? The lady here last night stated it very well. Hawking was saying, that every cause in the world, in the universe, is the product of a prior natural event. So there are no miracles, there are no exceptions to this. Everything is just a product of a previous natural event. Okay, that's called scientific determinism. What does that imply? First of all, this is a philosophical assertion, not a scientific conclusion. It begs the question in favor of atheism. Do you see that this is a philosophical conclusion he makes here? He can't learn this by doing some sort of experiment. This is not a scientific conclusion. This is a philosophical presupposition. He says scientific determinism is true, therefore there are no miracles, therefore atheism is true. How does he know this? Because he said so. That's it. I just said so. It's an assertion. There's no evidence for this. This is just a philosophical assertion. That's why I said last night, science doesn't say anything, scientists do. And if you're not good at philosophy, you may come up with bad scientific conclusions. And this book that Hawking has written is just loaded with philosophical presuppositions that he can't prove. Atheistic philosophical presuppositions. Suppose some Christian said, miracles do occur. In fact, they happen all the time. And then you ask the Christian why, and he just says, because I said so. You'd say, well, what do you mean? Because that's an assertion. I need some evidence. He has no evidence for this. This is just what he says. Secondly, this also means that Hawking's thoughts in this book are determined. In other words, we have no reason to believe they are true. If every effect in the universe is a product of a previous natural cause, then so are his thoughts. His thoughts are the product of a previous natural cause, which means we have no free will, which means he's not really reasoning. What's he doing? He's simply a product of previous natural causes. He doesn't have free will. He's not really thinking. These thoughts are just coming to him because of some brain chemistry going on here. He's just molecules in motion. If that's the case, why should we believe what he says? This is what some might say a universal acid that burns everything up. It burns its own theory up. To say determinism is true is to say, well, how did I come to the conclusion that determinism is true? Because I had a previous natural cause it in my mind. Well, how would I know then what I'm really believing is true then? You wouldn't. So he's just given up the entire show here by saying this. How can you be a scientist? How can you discover truth if this is the case? You can't. In fact, he says it on page 32. Free will is just an illusion. If free will is just an illusion, then so are his thoughts in this book, aren't they? This is a dream, basically. Well, why should we believe it then? Do you see why you can't do science unless you know philosophy? These are all philosophical assertions, and if you don't pick them out, you're going to be, wow, how do I deal with Hawking when he gets to the end and he says, there's no God? If you don't know philosophy, you won't be able to pick this out. Now he says that he asks a question here, and you're not going to believe, well, maybe you will believe it from what I just said, but check out this question that Stephen Hawking, the great physicist, asked. He says, do we really have reason to believe that an objective reality exists? What do physicists do? They observe objective reality, theoretically, and they discover what happens in the physical world, the objective physical world, right? Hawking is asking the question, do we even have any reason to believe that this physical, objective reality exists? You know what he says? What do you think he says? He says no. That's right. He says no, there is no model independent concept of reality. That's what he says. Now go back to what we talked about last night, the Roadrunner tactic, applying a claim to itself. If you apply that claim to itself, what do you get? You see, this is self-defeating. Is that concept of reality objective? Is it? It defeats itself. This also makes science impossible. Because if there is no objective reality, what is the scientist trying to observe? See, science is a search for causes. And if there is no objective reality, or let me put it this way, science is a search for causes in objective reality. If there is no objective reality, what are we looking for? And if everything in our mind is the product of a previous natural cause, are we even reasoning, or are we just reacting? We're just chemicals. We're just molecules in motion. Remember we talked about this last night? Remember Kant said you can't know the real world? And we said the answer to that is, well, then how do you know that about the real world? Well, you might as well just put Hawking in Kant's chair, because this is what Hawking's buying into. He's buying into Kant. That's why I said last night, if you can't understand Immanuel Kant, you can't understand modern philosophy, and now you can't understand Hawking unless you understand Kant. He's given up objective reality in order to say that there is no God, basically. That's what he gets to. That's where he's heading with this. I know this is kind of hard to believe when you think about it, but this is what a world-renowned physicist is saying. This is why Einstein said many years ago, he said, the man of science is a poor philosopher. The man of science is a poor philosopher. Hawking is a very poor philosopher. He's making elementary mistakes in logic and making assertions that he can't prove in order to get to the conclusion he wants. But there's more, as you might imagine. Those are just the philosophical problems. What are the scientific problems in the book? Well, let's take a look. Here's what he says on page 9. Multiple universes arise naturally from physical laws. And then he goes on to say, because there is a law like gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing. Okay, first of all, let's deal with the first, multiple universes. How do scientists, or atheists I should say, deal with the fact that the universe seems to be so precisely fine-tuned that there must be a designer out there? How do they deal with that from an atheistic perspective? You know what their answer is? Their answer is, we just happen to be in the universe that appears designed. Because you see, there are many universes out there, multiple universes out there, and we're just lucky to be in the one that looks designed, even though it really isn't. Now, is there any evidence for this? No. The only universe we know about is the one we're in, right? There's no evidence for it. This is just what is known as a metaphysical speculation about ultimate reality, which Hawking has just said doesn't exist anyway. But you see, we get into these contradictions by even trying to talk about what these people believe. But they're trying to avoid a designer. So he says multiple universes arise naturally from physical laws, and he says, you know, gravity will create us, or did create us. Now, what's the problem with this? First of all physical laws, including gravity, had a beginning and therefore need a cause. Remember, we pointed this out already. Space, matter, and time had a beginning. So there was no gravity to create anything. Gravity was created. If gravity was created, then gravity couldn't create us. And one wonders how gravity could create us anyway. Gravity is an impersonal force. Like, for example, when I drop this remote and it goes to the floor, gravity just does that. It's not thinking, if he drops that one more time, I'm not gonna pull that to the ground, right? It's an impersonal force, does the same thing over and over again. It's not thinking, it's not making decisions. It just does the same thing over. It's an impersonal force. Persons can make choices, and that's one reason we know that the beginner was personal, because only persons can choose to create. But impersonal forces make no choices. They just do the same thing over and over again. So to go from a state of non-existence to a state of creation, you have to make a choice. So the cause originally of the universe must be personal. Can't be gravity. Gravity was created anyway, all right? Also, a quantum vacuum is not nothing. Non-being, it needs a cause. Now you're probably wondering, what's a quantum vacuum? Hawking gets into this idea that at the quantum level, that's the very small level, subatomic particles, it might be the case that things pop into existence out of nothing. Well, if that's the case, maybe the whole universe popped into existence out of nothing. Because in a quantum vacuum, it's possible that things can pop into existence out of nothing. At least that's one interpretation of the quantum level. The real answer to that, of course, is that's only one interpretation of the quantum level. There are at least 10 different interpretations, and nobody knows which one is right. But a quantum vacuum is not nothing. It's not non-being. Even if in a quantum vacuum particles come into existence without a cause, at least a cause we can identify, the question is, what created the quantum vacuum? Where did that come from? Hawking has no answer for that. Finally, the speculative multiple universes, even if they exist, need a cause. Yesterday I gave a quote early on when we were talking about the cosmological argument. It was from a cosmologist called Alexander Vilenkin, a Russian cosmologist, and he said this, that scientists now must deal with the fact that the universe had a beginning. I'm paraphrasing, but that's the short end of his quote. And this guy, Vilenkin, is a believer in the multiverse, that there are many universes out there. But even Vilenkin admits, he said, even if there are all these other universes out there, the whole show, all the universes together need a cause. They had to have a beginning. So even one of the biggest proponents of the multiverse says, at the end of the day, you ultimately have to get back to a beginning of the whole thing. So even if he's right about multi-universes, it doesn't help them avoid a beginner, okay? So that's Stephen Hawking. You don't need to be afraid of Stephen Hawking if you just know a little logic and a little philosophy, and some science here too, because he gets a lot of that wrong as well, unfortunately, all right? Has anyone had any dealings with this book? Or I know a few of you have read it, okay? Anyone have any questions on it before we move on? Yes, ma'am. The other author's name is Leonard Mlodinow. It's Mlodinow. He teaches at where does he teach? Caltech, yeah. And is he Russian? I don't know if he is. He lives in Pasadena. He teaches at Caltech. I don't know if he's originally from Russia or not. Hawking is, of course, for a long period, was the professor at Cambridge in England. Oh, if he influenced Stephen? No, Hawking has been going down this road for a long time. For a while, Hawking came up with a theory called imaginary time to avoid a beginning, which is another philosophical concept. But even Hawking admitted that in real time, the universe had a beginning. In imaginary time, it didn't. Let me make one other point about Hawking. You know what Hawking is basically saying? By the way, who in here has seen the movie The Matrix? Have you seen the movie The Matrix? Okay. Hawking is saying we're in the Matrix. That's what he's saying, basically. He's saying we're in the Matrix. We don't really know objective reality. It's all a dream. Let me ask you a question. If you were in the Matrix, how could you know you're in the Matrix? You got to get that red pill. You got to get to, what's his name? Leo. Who? Who's the guy you got to get to? Morpheus. You got to get to Morpheus to figure it out, right? I mean, what Hawking is saying is we're in the Matrix. Basically, you're in a dream. There is no objective reality. Let me ask you a question. How do you know that you're having a dream? You wake up. And when you wake up, you go, whew, that was just a dream, right? The only way to know you're having a dream is to wake up. The only way to know you're in the Matrix is to get out of the Matrix. Hawking has to be outside the Matrix to know we're in the Matrix. See? So philosophically, this just doesn't work. Again, he's standing outside of objective reality to say, we're all in the Matrix. Well, how come he can be outside, but we can't, right? It's like Kant saying, you know, I can see objective reality, but you can't. You can't. There is an objective reality, but you can't know it. Well, why can you know it, but we can't? See? He's outside of his own theory. He's granting himself an exception to his own theory. Okay, that's the grand design by Stephen Hawking. You don't need to be afraid of it.